The night she made a drunken decision to marry a stranger was the night her life changed forever. But the man she wed wasn't just any stranger. He was the one person she could never have imagined would be part of her world. If you're loving this, hit like and subscribe to stay in the loop. Let's keep this going. The wild night Tasha had always prided herself on her ability to control her life. As a successful lawyer, she had built a life defined by logic, discipline, and hard work. So when her best friend, Camille, insisted that she attend a lavish rooftop party at one of the most exclusive clubs in Manhattan, Tasha hesitated. It wasn't her scene. But after a long week of high-stakes negotiations, she was tempted by the promise of a carefree night. As she arrived, the skyline glittered. Under the night sky, the music was loud and the champagne flowed freely. By the time she had downed a few drinks, Tasha's usual reservation had dissolved into laughter. She found herself next to a tall, handsome stranger with piercing blue eyes and a mischievous grin. His name was Oliver, and he was quick to make her laugh with witty comments about the absurdity of the wealthy world they inhabited. They talked about everything and nothing, the hours slipping by unnoticed. By the end of the night, as the room spun around her and her inhibitions dissolved, Tasha did something she would never normally do. She agreed to marry him. The words tumbled out of her mouth in a haze of tequila and excitement. Oliver's eyes widened in surprise, but then he grinned. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice filled with playful curiosity. She nodded, and in the haze of the party, they sealed their fate with an impromptu kiss. The next morning, Tasha woke up with a pounding headache and a sense of disorientation. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself in a luxurious, modern penthouse far beyond anything she could afford. She was lying in a king-sized bed, tangled in silk sheets, and beside her lay the man from the night before, Oliver, the memory of. The night was foggy, but the glittering diamond ring on her finger was unmistakably real. She stared at it, her heart sinking. What had she done? She sat up quickly, trying to piece together the night's events. She remembered the laughter, the promises, the kiss, but marrying a man she barely knew? That was a decision she would never have made sober. Oliver stirred beside her, his body radiating warmth. He opened his eyes, offering a sleepy smile. "Morning." "Beautiful," he said, stretching. "You okay?" His calm, reassuring tone only heightened her sense of panic. What was she doing here? "I think I might have made a mistake," Tasha muttered, her voice shaky. "No, you didn't," he said, his smile widening. "We're married now, and I'm glad we are." His words were comforting, but they only made Tasha feel more confused. She had gone from a steady, logical life to this whirlwind, uncertain existence. He wasn't just a stranger, he was someone with wealth, power, and influence. Could she trust him, or had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? Tasha barely had time to process what had happened before Oliver whisked her away for what seemed like the most extravagant day of her life. They sailed on a private yacht overlooking the Manhattan skyline, and Oliver talked about his life with such ease, but there were things he never seemed to say. As they enjoyed a gourmet lunch on the deck, Tasha's curiosity grew. She needed to know more. "So, what exactly do you do?" she asked, her voice playful but edged with genuine curiosity. Oliver laughed, his blue eyes sparkling in the sunlight. "You could say I'm the CEO of a multinational tech company." His words hit her like a punch. She tried to hide her shock, but her mind raced. She had married a billionaire. She had no idea what kind of empire he ran, but it wasn't like her world. I had no idea," Tasha said, her voice barely a whisper. "You really didn't, did you?" Oliver's grin softened as he leaned in, placing a hand on hers. "I like to keep my personal life separate from my business. But I promise, I'm just a regular guy, at least when I'm with you." She wasn't sure if his words reassured her or made her more confused. How could someone who was so powerful be so casual about something as significant as marriage? After lunch, Oliver invited her to meet his family, and Tasha's nerves went into overdrive. They arrived at a sprawling mansion perched on the edge of the city, and the moment they stepped inside, it felt like she had walked into a different world altogether. The foyer was vast, with high ceilings and walls adorned with priceless art. Oliver's parents were already there, and the moment they set eyes on Tasha, she felt their scrutiny. His father, a tall, imposing figure, surveyed her with cold eyes. "So, you're the woman who captured my son's attention," he said, his voice like polished stone. His mother, a well-dressed woman with sharp features, smiled warmly, but there was a calculating look in her eyes. Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that she was being assessed in ways she didn't fully understand. She tried to keep her composure, but the entire atmosphere felt foreign and intimidating. Oliver's father didn't say much but gave a nod of approval. "We'll talk business later," he said, dismissing them with a wave. "I assume you're comfortable, Tasha." His mother's voice was soft but pointed. Tasha nodded, trying to hide her discomfort. As Oliver led her through the estate, she realized just how different his life was from her own. She didn't know what she had gotten herself into, but the pull of Oliver's charm and the overwhelming allure of his world kept her tethered. For now, at least. The mansion felt like a living, breathing entity. Its walls seemed to whisper the stories of generations before. As Tasha stepped through the doors of Oliver's family estate, she was immediately hit by a sense of wealth that felt almost oppressive. The marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, and the air smelled of fresh flowers and antique wood. Oliver led her through the grand hallway, stopping in front of a massive portrait of his family. His parents' faces stared down at her, stoic and unwelcoming. His father's cold eyes seemed to size her up in an instant. "You must be Tasha," he said in a tone that made it clear he was not impressed by her presence, nor was he eager to have her in his world. But his mother's face softened as she extended her hand, her smile warm but too polished. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you." Tasha managed a polite smile but couldn't shake the feeling that this introduction was more about her meeting their expectations than a real connection. As they sat down for dinner, Oliver's parents didn't ask much about her life. Instead, the conversation flowed effortlessly between business dealings and family legacies. Tasha felt like a mere spectator to a world she could barely understand. She watched Oliver, trying to figure out how someone so kind and down-to-earth could come from such a cold, calculating world. Later that evening, after the formalities of dinner were over, Tasha found herself alone with Oliver's older brother, Liam. Liam was quieter, more reserved than Oliver, but there was an intensity to him that made Tasha uneasy. As they walked through the garden, the conversation turned unexpectedly dark. "So, you've really married into this world, huh?" Liam said, his tone bitter, almost sarcastic. Tasha, unsure of how to respond, nodded. "I guess," she muttered, not knowing if she was truly part of it yet. Liam glanced at her, his gaze piercing. "It's not all champagne and roses, you know. The empire our family built wasn't built on clean hands. We've made enemies, crushed dreams, and, well, let's just say there are things about Oliver's business that he's never told you. Things that are better left unsaid." Tasha felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Liam's face hardened, and he leaned in closer. "Let's just say that power doesn't come without a price. Be careful what you get involved in. You're not just marrying Oliver. You're marrying the weight of everything he represents." Tasha's heart raced. She had no idea what she was walking into. Oliver had been open about his success, but he had never mentioned the darkness that seemed to follow his family. Was she ready to live in the shadow of that power? The following day, Oliver took Tasha on a private tour of his company's headquarters. a towering glass building that looked out over the city like a monument to success. The sleek, high-tech environment was far removed from the life Tasha knew. As they stepped into Oliver's office, she was struck by the cold, impersonal nature of the place. Everything was meticulously arranged, too perfect, too sterile. Oliver had already begun his morning meeting with his team when she arrived. He didn't even glance up as Tasha entered, completely absorbed in the conversation. "We need to close the deal by Friday," he said to the group, his voice commanding, his demeanor all business. Tasha stood at the door, feeling like an outsider. She had seen Oliver's charm and warmth, but here he was someone else entirely. He was a man who could manipulate markets, who made decisions that affected thousands of people. And then, as if sensing her gaze, Oliver glanced up and flashed her a quick, reassuring smile before returning to the meeting. The contrast between his two worlds hit her hard. The Oliver she knew, the kind, caring man, seemed miles away from the ruthless businessman who ran a global empire. When the meeting ended, Tasha approached him cautiously. "Do you ever feel like you're losing yourself in all of this?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with concern. He looked at her, his face softening for just a moment. "I try not to," he said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But sometimes, it's hard to know who you are when you've built something this big." Tasha's heart ached for him. She knew he wasn't just talking about his company, he was talking about himself. Later that evening, Tasha couldn't shake the unease she felt after Oliver's conversation with his team. She needed answers. As they sat in the living room of his estate, a fire crackling in the background, she turned to him with the question that had been haunting her all day. "Oliver, what are you really doing here? With me, I mean. What is this marriage? Is it just a business move for you?" Oliver froze, his eyes darkening as he looked at her. For a moment, the air between them was thick with tension. He stood up abruptly, pacing before responding. "What do you think this is? Some kind of deal?" "No, Tasha, I didn't marry you for business. I married you because I love you." His voice was low, filled with frustration. "But there's a lot more to my life than just love. I can't escape this world. I can't escape my family's expectations, my business commitments. You knew that when we got together." Tasha felt a knot form in her stomach. She had never considered the weight of Oliver's obligations before. She had been so caught up in the whirlwind of their romance that she hadn't realized the depth of what she was becoming a part of. "So what am I?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just another piece of your world? Or something more?" Oliver's face softened, and for the first time in a long time, Tasha saw vulnerability in his eyes. "You're more than that. But I don't know how to make it all work." His words hung in the air, and Tasha felt a deep ache in her chest. She was falling in love with a man who had never truly been free. The tension between Tasha and Oliver had been building for days, and Tasha could no longer ignore it. She had tried to convince herself that love could overcome the complexities of their different worlds, but reality kept intruding. As she sat on the balcony of her apartment one evening, staring out at the glowing skyline of Manhattan, the weight of her situation pressed down on her. It wasn't just Oliver's wealth and power. It was the darker side of his world that was starting to suffocate her. He was constantly juggling business deals, family expectations, and his role as the heir to a vast fortune. And in the midst of it all, Tasha was left questioning her place in it. The woman she had always been, independent, self-assured, was slipping away. She was no longer just a lawyer. She was the wife of a billionaire, someone who could never truly escape the world that Oliver had been born into. The thought made her stomach churn. She missed the woman she used to be, the woman who had the freedom to make her own choices without a web of power and control ensnaring her. But there was another part of her, one that had fallen in love with Oliver despite the complications. He wasn't just the heir to a fortune. He was a man who struggled with his own demons, someone who wanted to be more than what the world demanded of him. She had seen the flashes of vulnerability in him, moments when he let down his guard. And in those moments, she knew that their love was real. But was it enough to make her stay, to risk losing herself in the process? Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed. It was Oliver. "Meet me tonight. We need to talk." The words on the screen were simple, but they sent a surge of emotion through her. She had a feeling that this conversation would change everything. Tasha arrived at Oliver's penthouse later that evening, her mind racing with questions. As she stepped inside, she was immediately struck by the somber atmosphere. The usual warmth in Oliver's eyes was replaced by a shadow of uncertainty. He was standing near the large windows, gazing out at the city below, as if searching for answers in the skyline. When he turned to face her, his expression was serious, more serious than she had ever seen him. "Tasha, we need to be honest with each other," Oliver said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I've been running from the truth, from what I really want in my life. And now I realize that I've dragged you into a world that you don't belong in. You didn't sign up for this." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment when the man she loved would finally face the reality of their situation. But instead of anger or resentment, she felt a strange sense of relief. Oliver wasn't the powerful billionaire everyone saw. He was just a man trying to survive in a world that demanded too much from him. "I never wanted to be a part of this world," Oliver continued, his voice breaking. "I wanted to be with you, Tasha, but I didn't realize how deep this web went. My family, my business, they don't care about us. They only care about their legacy, and I'm caught in the middle of it." Tasha stepped forward, placing a hand on his chest. She could feel the tension in his body, the fight he was losing. Within himself, "Oliver, you don't have to fight this alone," she said softly. "I love you, but I need you to make a choice. A real choice. Not just between your family and me, but between the man you want to be and the man they're trying to make you into." He looked down at her, his eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I can do that," he whispered. "I don't know if I can walk away from everything I've built." The words stung, but Tasha knew they were the truth. They were both standing on the edge, unsure of what would happen next. But one thing was clear: this was the moment of reckoning. Either they would make it through this together, or they would both be consumed by the world that had already begun to swallow them whole. As the night stretched on, Tasha found herself walking through the streets of Manhattan, her thoughts swirling in a whirlwind of confusion and hope. She had spent so much of her life focused on logic, on what made sense, that she had never truly allowed herself to feel what was in her heart. But now, with everything on the line, she couldn't ignore it any longer. She loved Oliver. And yet, she was terrified. Terrified of losing herself, of becoming someone she didn't recognize. But more than that, she feared losing him, losing the man who had been her rock, the one person who saw her for who she truly was. She couldn't ignore the connection they had, the bond they had formed despite everything. But could she truly stay? Could she live in a world where she would constantly be overshadowed by Oliver's legacy? Could she reconcile the life she had built for herself with the life he was offering her? By the time she reached her apartment, the decision had been made. It wasn't just about love. It was about who they were as individuals. She needed to make a choice, one that would define not only their future but her own. She pulled out her phone and dialed Oliver's number. When he picked up, she spoke without hesitation. "I'm coming over. We need to talk. For real this time." As she made her way back to him, she felt a sense of clarity wash over her. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, Tasha felt ready to face them. Together, she and Oliver would find a way to make it work, not because they were destined to be together, but because they chose to be. They chose to fight for each other, no matter the cost. The next morning, Tasha woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced the truth, and now it was time to move forward. She had made her decision, and so had Oliver. He had promised her that he was willing to fight for their love, to step away from the things that had held him captive for so long. And though their journey was far from over, it felt like the first real step toward freedom. Later that day, Oliver took her hand and led her to the very place where they had first met, on the rooftop of a glamorous Manhattan club. But this time, it wasn't about wealth or power. It was about the love they had built, the foundation they had created together. "I want you to know something," Oliver said, looking deep into her eyes. "I've spent my whole life chasing things that didn't matter. But you, Tasha, you're the only thing that's real to me. And I'm not going to let you go." Tasha smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She had finally found the balance between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. And for the first time, she felt truly free. Together, they would forge their own path, a path that was filled with love, trust, and the courage to face whatever challenges came their way. The road ahead would not be easy, but Tasha knew one thing for sure: she wasn't facing it alone. The road to finding peace wasn't easy. As Oliver tried to distance himself from his family's business, the stakes became even higher. His father was relentless, and the pressure to conform to the family legacy weighed heavily on him. His mother, too, had a vision of the life Oliver should lead, a life filled with control, expectation, and conformity. Every time Oliver stood his ground, it felt like they were pulling him back in. The constant tension between his own desires and his family's expectations gnawed at him. Tasha, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated. Her colleagues at work, who had once admired her ambition and determination, now saw her through a different lens. She wasn't just a rising star in the legal world anymore. She was a married woman, the wife of a billionaire. Some whispered that her career had been propelled by her marriage. Some even questioned her capabilities, assuming she had traded her independence for wealth. It was painful to feel like a stranger in her own world, but she refused to let it define her. One evening, when Oliver and Tasha were having dinner, the phone rang. It was Oliver's father. "Oliver, you will come to the family meeting tomorrow." His father's voice boomed over the phone. "We need to discuss your future. This nonsense about breaking from the company has gone far enough." Tasha watched as Oliver's face hardened. He had been torn between staying true to himself and honoring his family. But in that moment, the resolve in his eyes was clear. He was ready to fight back. The meeting the following day was a turning point. Oliver's father had arranged it at the family estate, surrounded by lavish furnishings and the smell of old money. The atmosphere was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken judgments and expectations. His father sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, as though he was holding a throne that Oliver was meant to inherit. "Tasha," Oliver's father began, his voice cutting through the tension, "you've been distracting my son. He needs to focus on what matters, on building the family's future, not indulging in this romantic fantasy." Tasha's breath caught. The words were like daggers aimed directly at her heart. She had known that her marriage to Oliver would never be accepted by his family, but hearing it so plainly stung more than she expected. Oliver reached for her hand under the table, squeezing it tightly. She met his gaze, and in that moment, they both knew what had to be done. "Father, I'm not asking for your approval," Oliver said, his voice steady. "I'm done with pretending. I'm choosing my own path, and it's one that includes Tasha. She's not a distraction. She's my partner." His father's face turned crimson. "You're making a terrible mistake, Oliver. You will regret this." Tasha felt her heart pound in her chest as the tension escalated. Oliver stood firm, his resolve unshakable. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I'm not going to follow your path. I'm going to create my own." In that moment, the weight of the family's legacy seemed to crumble, and for the first time, Tasha felt like they were fighting not just for their love, but for their freedom. Next few days were filled with uncertainty. Tasha and Oliver had made their decision, but the consequences were still unfolding. As Oliver severed ties with his family's empire, his personal finances and future were put at risk. He wasn't just walking away from money, he was walking away from the life he had known since childhood. Tasha, too, faced challenges of her own. Her colleagues at the law firm began to distance themselves from her, the whispers growing louder. People in her circle seemed to believe she was nothing more than a trophy wife, that her career had been handed to her on a silver platter. But Tasha wasn't ready to back down. She knew the strength that she had always carried within her. She wasn't going to let anyone strip her of her identity. One night, as they sat together in their living room, Oliver turned to Tasha. "I'm not going to lose you, Tasha. I'll work twice as hard to make sure that doesn't happen. We'll figure this out together." Tasha smiled at him, her heart swelling with affection. "We've already figured it out, Oliver. We made the hardest decision we could make. Now we just have to live it." They both knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but as long as they had each other, they felt invincible. They had taken control of their destiny, and together, they would rise above the challenges that came their way. The day they decided to finally make the break was both liberating and terrifying. Oliver liquidated his family assets, redirecting the funds into a new business venture that he and Tasha would build together. It was risky, but for the first time in a long while, they felt like they were on equal ground. The transition wasn't without sacrifice. Tasha had to prove herself as a lawyer again, building her reputation from the ground up. And Oliver had to start fresh, away from the name he had once carried with pride. As they stood in the office space they had rented for their new venture, Oliver turned to Tasha with a look of determination. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice filled with conviction. Tasha took his hand, knowing they had both sacrificed everything they knew for a chance at freedom. But in that moment, they had everything they needed: each other. Months passed, and the sacrifices they had made slowly began to pay off. Oliver's new business venture was thriving, with Tasha by his side, offering legal advice and supporting him in every step of the way. They had created something from nothing, a company built on their own terms, without the strings attached to Oliver's family legacy. Tasha, too, had proven herself in her career. Her reputation had been restored, and she had earned the respect of her colleagues once again. Her work was no longer seen as a result of her marriage, but as the product of her skill, intelligence, and dedication. It was a hard-earned victory, but one that she cherished deeply. One day, as they stood together in their new office, Oliver smiled at her, his eyes full of pride. "We did it, Tasha," he said softly. "We really did it." Tasha returned the smile, her heart swelling with pride. "No, Oliver, you did it. And I'm proud of you." As the months turned into years, Oliver and Tasha's business continued to grow, becoming a symbol of what could be achieved when two people stood together, unapologetically themselves. They had faced unimaginable challenges and come out stronger. On the other side, the sacrifices they had made had been worth it. One day, Oliver took Tasha aside in their office, the same place where it all began. "Tasha," he said, his voice full of emotion, "there's one more thing I want to do." Tasha looked at him curiously, unsure of what he meant. "I want to take this to the next level," he said, smiling. "I want us to change the world. Together, not just through our business, but by making a real difference. What do you say?" Tasha took his hand, her heart full. "I'm with you, Oliver, always." Together, they embarked on the next chapter of their journey, knowing that the love they had fought for had become a foundation for something greater than they could ever have imagined. Years later, the company they had built together was not only financially successful, but also a leader in corporate social responsibility. They had used their wealth and influence to help those in need, creating opportunities for people from all walks of life. They had become known not just for their business acumen, but for their integrity and their dedication to making the world a better place. Tasha and Oliver had created a legacy that was built on love, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that they could make a difference, together. As they stood together, looking out over the city that had once seemed so daunting, they knew that their journey was far from over. The world was theirs to shape, and they were ready to do it side by side. Tasha stood beside Oliver on the rooftop of their office building, just as they had that night when their lives changed forever. The city lights shimmered below, and the air was filled with the same energy and promise that had once overwhelmed her. But now she felt a sense of peace. She had found herself. She had found her place in the world, not as the wife of a billionaire, but as an equal partner in the life she and Oliver had built. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she asked, her voice full of gratitude. Oliver smiled, his arm wrapped around her waist. "We've come farther than I ever imagined, Tasha, and we're just getting started." Together, they looked out at the horizon, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that no matter the challenges, their love would carry them through.